Welcome to our P1 and P2 Scottish Assembly. You are in for a treat.
The Dog Show by J.K. Annan. Look at all those poodle dogs with curly hair and floppy legs. And yours is with their ribbon tail. We smell you, snooty AR. And Pekingese, which yap, yap, yap. Which only fit for my lady's lap. And big bulldogs and growling pugs. With slaving tongues and ugly mugs. Dogs of all shapes and sizes. And competing for the cups and prizes. There's none of mine which I like. As well as my aim, me towsy type.
2. Bus Queue by J.K. Annan. Waiting for a bus, a wifey made a fuss. Said it wasn't fair to keep us standing there. Seemed to think she spoke for all the other folk. We didn't care how long we waited there. We played the game I Spy, and the time fair started by. We wouldn't get the blame if the school bus never came.
I Wish I Was a Fairy by James Robertson. I wish I was a fairy with silken gossamer wings. I was sitting on a puddock still and thinking fairy things. Poor wee birdie sitting on a hill. Ane called Jack and another called Jill. Flee away Jack and flee away Jill. Come back Jack and come back Jill. Cutter Doon by Alexander Anderson. We barely snuggered, didn't nix. We mucker foxed and din. Tried to sweep you whack about your favours coming in. Waiting for the bus, how wifey made a fuss. Said it wasn't fair to keep us standing there. Seemed to think she spoke for all the other folk up it, then they care how long they stayed. They played the game I spanned the time tipped by. They wouldn't get the blame if the school bus never came. That was called the Bus Queue, written by J.K. Annan. On his motorbike, father on his car, scalping through the countryside, travelling near and far. Puddocks by Sheena Blackwell. If puddocks were like evergreens, they'd breed the hail year round. We sick the roof, taddy eggs, the maist, us would drown. I wish I was a fairy with silk and gossamer wings, sitting on the puddock still, thinking fairy things. I'd flee about the country, I'd flee about the town, I'd flee into a fairy shop, I would buy a fairy gun. I wish I was a fairy with silken gossamer wings, sitting on a puddock stool thinking fairy things. The Spaceman by J.K. Annan. I think I'll be a spaceman and travel to the moon to poke about the craters and see what I can find. They say it's full of diamonds, gold and silver ore. I'll lay them in my spaceship till I hit quite a store. Then I'll come home as a rich one and down up the street. Nodding my fancy helmet to welcome all I meet. I Wish I Was a Fairy by James Robertson. I wish I was a fairy with silken gossamer wings, sitting on a puddock stool, thinking fairy things. I'd flee about the country, I'd flee about the town, I'd flee into a fairy shop and buy a fairy gun. I'd flee into a cafe for a cup of fairy tea, and buzz, the insect zapper would make fairy toast on me. Sausage on by J.K.M. John doesn't like her haggis, her parrots, and her brats. And when they set for her, she turns her nose up. If she keeps being sassy, kicking up a fuss, she'll soon look like a wee rhinoceros. Waiting for the bus, our wifey made a fuss. Said it wasn't fair to keep us standing there. Seemed to think she spoke for us the Isa folk. Actually didn't care how long we waited there. We played Siggy Mice. I was a fairy with silky gossamer wings, sitting on a pedestal, thinking fairy things. I'd flee about the country, I'd flee about the town, I'd flee into a fairy shop and buy a fairy gown. I'd flee into a cafe and have a cup of tea, and Buzz the insect zapper will make fairy toast of me. Hairy feet, who were you hidden? Right by my plug hole, you classy wee mitten. Hairy feet, with the cat flap, I'll dunk you and turn on my tap. I wish I was a fairy with silk and gossamer wings, sitting on a paddock stool, thinking fairy things. I'd flee about the country, I'd flee about the town, I'd flee into a fairy shop and buy a fairy gown. I'd flee into a cafe, throw a cup of fairy tea, and Buzz the insect zapper would make fairy toast on me. Saucy Jean. Jean doesn't like her haggis, her parrot and her rose, and when it's set for her, she turned up her nose. She keeps being saucy, making up a fuss. She'll soon begin to look like a wee rhinoceros. Waiting for a bus, and wifey made a fuss. Said it wasn't fair to keep her standing there. I think she spoke for the ignorant folk. We didn't care. Too long we waited. Played the game I spy, and time festered by. We wouldn't get the blame if the Scully bus never came. I Wish I Was a Fairy by James Robertson. I wish I was a fairy with silk and gossamer wings, sitting on a paddock stone thinking fairy things. I flee about the country, I flee about the town, I flee into a fairy shop to buy a fairy gown. I flee into a cafe for a cup of fairy tea. Buzz the goes the insect zapper and Max some fairy toast on me. I Wish I Was a Fairy by James Robertson. I wish I was a fairy with silk and gossamer wings, sitting on a paddock stool, thinking fairy things. I'd flee about the country, I'd flee about the town, I'd flee into a fairy shop and buy a fairy gown. I'd flee into a cafe for a cup of fairy tea, and Buzz the insect zapper would make fairy toast on me.